Imagine this. You're living in the Qing Imperial Palace. The corridors are polished stone, the air smells faintly of incense, and every step you take makes that polite tap-tap sound that instantly makes you paranoid someone's eavesdropping. You're not just any visitor, oh no. You're here for the night shift. And by night shift, I mean, you're about to witness the Emperor's bedtime routine. Now, before you picture candlelit romance and whispered sweet nothings, let's get one thing straight. This isn't that kind of love story. The Emperor's nights ran on a schedule so strict, even your phone's calendar would feel underdressed. Every minute was planned, every meeting logged, and every interaction recorded like it was state policy. Because it was. And you? You'd better stay quiet, because here comes a eunuch carrying a concubine wrapped in a giant sheet of imperial yellow silk. Yes, you heard me right. Carried. Like a sacred delivery package. There's no giggling, no winking, just solemn lantern light, guards who look like they've never smiled in their lives, and the kind of silence that makes you swallow your cough for fear of disrupting the empire. So, buckle up. Tonight, you're not just learning about imperial romance, you're going to walk the same corridors, see the same ritual, and maybe start wondering if palace love was more paperwork than passion. Before we start, if you're fascinated by the hidden world of the Qing Harem and want to explore more untold stories from history's most secretive courts, make sure to give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into the past, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which of these rules do you think was the strangest, and why? Your insights help keep this history alive. Let's begin. In the Qing Harem, intimacy didn't begin with longing gazes or secret love notes. No, it began with a list. A very fancy, very official, bureaucratic masterpiece of a list. Every evening, once the palace had settled into that eerie, you could hear a hairpin drop kind of silence, the emperor's chief eunuch would stride in holding the roster. This wasn't some scrap of paper casually pulled from a pocket. Oh no, it was the product of a rotation system so strict it made the empire's tax code look flexible. The names of eligible women were carved into thin ivory plaques, each polished so smooth you could probably check your reflection in it. Some even had gold leaf details, because apparently nothing says romantic selection process like luxury stationery. Higher-ranking women's names came first, followed by the lesser consorts, and in certain reigns, the plaques came with tiny painted portraits, just in case the emperor needed a visual reminder. Ah yes, Concubine Liu, the one with the excellent cheekbones. The emperor would make his choice, sometimes with the decisiveness of a man picking a favorite tea, sometimes with the hesitation of someone scrolling Netflix for 2 hours. Either way, the decision was instantly written into the official register, complete with the date, the woman's full title, and the exact time of selection. This wasn't just a bedroom matter, it was a political event, capable of shaking the balance of power at court. One night with the emperor could change everything. If a woman conceived, her rank could soar, bringing wealth and influence to her entire family. But weeks, or worse, months, without being chosen, could signal a fall from favor that was nearly impossible to reverse. The roster was also a weapon of politics. Want to reward a loyal family? Pick their daughter. Want to punish a rival? Pretend their daughter's plaque doesn't even exist. And while the emperor theoretically had free choice, palace regulations ensured no woman could monopolize his nights for too long, in theory to prevent jealousy. In reality, clever eunuchs could accidentally adjust the order of the plaques, guiding the emperor's supposedly random pick with all the subtlety of a stage magician. In the Qing harem, power could change hands with the turn of an ivory plaque. For the women on that list, it wasn't just a name carved in bone. It was a lifeline to survival, influence, and maybe, just maybe, immortality through the birth of an heir. Once a concubine's name was picked from the roster, you might think the palace would break into flurries of romance. Candlelight, whispered advice from her friends, maybe a little extra perfume. Nope. The reality? Her preparation for the emperor was about as personal as a military drill. The second her name was announced, attendants moved in, with the precision of a pit crew at the Grand Prix. Off came the elaborate silk robes. Off came the glittering jewelry. Out went the carefully arranged hairpins she'd probably sat still for 3 hours to get just right. And the perfume? Gone. Every trace of it scrubbed away until she stood there completely naked, not a silk thread in sight. Then came the yellow cloth. This wasn't just any fabric. This was the exact imperial shade of yellow, the color reserved for one person in the entire empire, the Son of Heaven himself. Think of it as the emperor's personal brand color, like a royal trademark. The moment it was wrapped around her, she wasn't just getting dressed, she was being symbolically claimed. The cloth was wrapped tightly from shoulders to feet, arms tucked inside like she was about to be mailed somewhere expensive. Romantic? Not really. Practical? Absolutely. No charms, no trinkets, no hidden daggers could make it into the emperor's bedchamber. Security was no joke. History had seen its fair share of palace assassination attempts. This was the imperial version of an airport pat-down, except it came with silk and ceremony. It was also a power move. Being undressed and then wrapped in imperial yellow was the palace's silent way of saying, in this moment, your body belongs to the emperor. And yes, there was a touch of ritual purity to it. Intimacy with the emperor wasn't just personal, it was political. In the court's eyes, this wasn't about pleasure, it was about producing heirs and keeping the mandate of heaven intact. For the concubine, feelings were complicated. Pride? Definitely. Fear? Almost always. The awareness that this could be the moment that changed her fate forever. Undeniable. Once a concubine was stripped, wrapped in imperial yellow, and officially declared ready, you might think the next step would be a graceful walk through the palace toward the emperor's bedchamber, perhaps accompanied by music, maybe a trail of flower petals. Nope. Walking was off the table. Literally. Instead, she was carried, on the back of a eunuch. Yes, carried, like a sacred royal backpack. The official court explanation? Health. The Forbidden City's stone floors could turn into icy slabs during Beijing's brutal winters, and traditional medicine believed a sudden chill to a woman's feet could disrupt her health and even lower her chances of conceiving. So, in theory, this was a kindness, a way to keep her warm, fresh, and baby-ready upon arrival. But that's only half the story. The other half is about control. From the moment her name was called, the concubine's movements weren't hers anymore. She couldn't stroll in at her own pace or decide she wasn't feeling it tonight. Nope, once you're Rab, with her arms bound inside the yellow cloth and her legs dangling off a eunuch's back, she was entirely at the mercy of palace protocol. And this wasn't always a short, romantic jaunt. The Forbidden City is enormous, a sprawling labyrinth of gates, courtyards, and echoing corridors. The route could be long and winding, with guards posted at intervals like checkpoints in a game you do not want to lose. Every step was watched, to make sure there was no whisper to an outsider, no veering off course, and definitely no sudden detour to grab a midnight snack. Historians also suggest a symbolic angle. The concubine was literally being lifted off the ground, as if entering a sacred realm above the ordinary world. Elevated? Yes, but also immobilized. Because as lofty as it sounds, the reality was a bit humbling. This wasn't a woman walking into a romantic rendezvous. This was a carefully wrapped, closely guarded delivery. And the meaning was crystal clear. The emperor's private chambers were a world apart. No one entered casually, not even the women closest to him. Every visit had to be staged like a ceremonial offering. So in the Qing Harem, even the trip to the emperor's bed wasn't just a stroll. It was a performance, one part ritual, one part security operation, and one part reminder that in the Forbidden City, power was felt not only in grand public displays, but in the silent, calculated steps taken behind closed doors. In the Qing Harem, intimacy wasn't about candlelit impulse or stolen moments. It was about time slots. And not just any time slots. There was a strictly enforced romance window, usually between 9 p.m. and midnight. Think of it as booking the emperor's affection the way you'd reserve a conference room, except the conference room is the Son of Heaven's bed and the meeting agenda is dynasty continuation. The origins of this rule came straight from the wise and slightly bossy court physicians. They insisted that certain hours of the night were best for preserving the emperor's vitality and boosting the odds of producing a healthy heir. Late evening, they said, was the golden zone, perfectly aligned with the body's natural rhythms and the sacred balance of yin and yang. Try to get intimate outside of those hours, risk depleting the emperor's life force. And nobody wanted a tired emperor, not when he was responsible for running an empire and a very full harem. But let's be honest, this wasn't just about ancient health tips. The emperor's life was a well-oiled, heavily guarded timetable. From dawn audiences with ministers to afternoon ceremonies and evening rituals, every moment was accounted for. Even passion had to clock in and clock out. And here's the thing, that time limit wasn't flexible. The concubine would be carried in, the encounter would take place within the set window, and when the clock struck midnight, that was it. Curtains down. If state business ran late and ate into the slot, the whole thing could be cancelled. No rescheduling, no rain checks. For the women, this meant that getting chosen was only half the battle. You still had to hope the emperor had the time and the mood before the clock ran out. Miss it, and you might be back in the roster line for weeks or even months. All of this stripped intimacy of any spontaneity. It wasn't about moonlit strolls or whispered affection. It was about duty. Producing heirs without wearing out the emperor's strength or interfering with governance. In the Forbidden City, the emperor's time, and even his desire, was managed like a national resource. The bedtime window wasn't a quaint tradition. It was a reminder that the emperor's body was considered as vital to the state as its armies, its treasury, and its laws. In the Qing Harem, no matter how much the emperor liked you, even if you were his undisputed favorite, you were never staying the whole night. There were no, let's just fall asleep in each other's arms moments here. The rule was ironclad. When the clock said your time was up, you were out. Here's how it went. Once the appointed hour of intimacy was over, usually before midnight, attendants would sweep in, rewrap you in that sacred imperial yellow cloth, and hoist you back onto the Eunuch Express for your return trip. Same silent corridors, same guarded gates, same solemn procession, just in reverse. It was less romantic stroll home, and more delivery being returned to sender. The court's official reasoning sounded perfectly respectable, if you were a court physician, that is. The emperor's sleep was not to be disturbed, his body kept in peak condition for the colossal task of running an empire. Linger too long in a woman's company, they warned, and his vital energy might be drained, weakening not just his health, but his authority. Security also played a role. The emperor was at his most vulnerable while sleeping, and only an elite inner guard was allowed anywhere near him at night. An empty bedchamber meant fewer opportunities for assassination, poisoning, or whispered midnight plots. But for the women, this rule could sting. There was no staying to talk, no sleepy morning greetings, no slow, comfortable bond building over shared pillows. Every encounter was transactional. You arrived, you fulfilled your duty, you left. Even the mothers of imperial heirs didn't get to linger until sunrise. The policy also sent a crystal-clear political message. This wasn't love, it was governance. A concubine's value lay not in her closeness to the emperor's heart, but in her ability to produce heirs and uphold her family's position. Letting someone stay the night risked creating an emotional attachment, and emotions had a nasty way of throwing off the delicate balance of power in the harem. Some historians even suspect a quiet, more personal motive: control. By sending a concubine away immediately, the emperor decided exactly when the night began and exactly when it ended, down to the minute. No negotiations, no exceptions. So, in the Forbidden City, even the emperor's bed came with fine print. Pleasure was allowed, but never without boundaries. And those boundaries made sure the Son of Heaven woke up every morning refreshed, unencumbered, and still firmly in charge. In the Qing harem, the emperor's love life wasn't just scheduled by the night, it was mapped out by the entire year. Think less, follow your heart, and more, consult the seasonal spreadsheet. His sex life was essentially a fusion of traditional Chinese medicine, imperial astrology, and a touch of palace superstition, with the occasional stern reminder from court physicians who treated his body like a national treasure. According to these learned men in silk robes, the human body was tied directly to the rhythms of nature. Spring, the season of renewal and fertility, the perfect time for more frequent visits to the harem, all in the name of producing healthy heirs. Summer? Whoa there, slow down. Too much heat and overexertion, they warned, could sap the emperor's strength. Autumn was about consolidating health, like preparing the imperial body for winter, which was the season of strict restraint. Conserve that energy, Your Majesty. The empire needs you strong. This wasn't mere advice. These rules were treated as state policy. The emperor's reproductive calendar was managed like a military campaign, with each night a strategic deployment of imperial vitality. An ill-timed pregnancy could be seen as a waste. A conception during an auspicious month was celebrated as heaven's direct approval of the dynasty's future. The schedule could be so rigid that even if the emperor longed to see his favorite concubine, he might be told, "Not tonight, sire. Wait 3 weeks." Conversely, if the stars and the seasonal charts aligned, he could be encouraged, read pressured, to spend extra nights with a specific woman, whether he was in the mood or not. For the women, the stakes were enormous. Being chosen during the right season, on the right night, could change everything. Miss that window, and you might spend the next year waiting for another shot at bearing an imperial heir. It's a perfect example of how the Qing court controlled every aspect of the emperor's private life. Even his most personal moments were woven into the empire's grand design, where every touch, every embrace, and every season was part of the machinery that kept the dynasty alive. In the Qing Harem, there was no such thing as private life for the emperor, at least not the way you and I might imagine it. Every moment, even the most intimate, was treated like a matter of state. Forget romantic secrets. Here, every late-night encounter was logged, stamped, and filed like an official imperial decree. The process was as precise as it was unromantic. Once the emperor made his pick from the nightly roster, palace scribes sprang into action. Her name, title, and rank went straight into the official register before the night even began. Then, once the visit was over, the exact date, the time, and the woman's identity were written down again, just in case anyone needed to confirm paternity later. In a palace with dozens of women vying for the same man, there was no room for maybe. These weren't just gossipy notes passed around by bored eunuchs. These were state documents, guarded like royal treasure, and reviewed by senior eunuchs who took their jobs very seriously. Their purpose? To make sure that when a baby was born, no one could question who the father was. No record, no legitimacy, and no place in the imperial succession. But this wasn't only about babies. The harem logs were also a kind of political scoreboard. If a certain concubine's name kept popping up, it meant her family's influence at court was on the rise. If her name suddenly vanished from the books, it was a public sign that her fortunes, and her relatives, had taken a sharp nosedive. Even the emperor wasn't above this system. He couldn't just sneak off for an unplanned visit. Every interaction, every choice, was inked into the archives. His sex life was as regulated as his foreign policy. The palace bureaucracy saw to that. Historians argue over whether this was a clever way to keep favoritism from turning into political chaos, or simply more proof that the emperor's body wasn't really his own. It belonged to the state. For the women, though, those records were everything. Each entry was proof that they still mattered. Each blank space was a warning that their time might be running out. And in the Qing court, the written record of a single night could ripple out to shape the politics of an entire empire. In the Qing harem, even the most private act had a closing ceremony, and it wasn't cuddling. No, once the emperor's time with a concubine was up, the romance ended and the audit began. That's right, the emperor's bed got inspected. The moment the door closed behind the concubine, in came the senior eunuchs, men so trusted they were basically the palace's combination of security detail, human clipboard, and forensic team. Their job? Examine the bedding and confirm that yes, imperial business had been conducted. To modern ears, this might sound like an extraordinary invasion of privacy, but to the imperial court, it made perfect sense. The emperor's semen, and yes, the records really did treat it this seriously, wasn't just a personal matter. It was a political resource, directly linked to the dynasty's survival. If there was even the slightest chance a pregnancy might result, the court wanted that on file before the ink dried on the knight's roster. The eunuchs weren't just looking, they were documenting. If they found the signs they were looking for, they logged it in the official records. In some cases, if conception was suspected, the sheets themselves could be sent off for further confirmation, which is a very polite way of saying even laundry could end up in the Imperial Archive. Why go to such lengths? Because in a palace with hundreds of ambitious women, a false claim of pregnancy wasn't just gossip, it could trigger political chaos. An official inspection cut down on imposters, made sure only genuine imperial heirs were recognized, and kept the bloodline and the power secure. For the women, this was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could protect them from being accused of faking a pregnancy. On the other, it meant that every night with the emperor ended with their private life reduced to evidence. Intimacy wasn't about emotion, it was about documentation. And that's the ultimate takeaway. In the Qing Harem, not even the bed was beyond bureaucracy. Every sheet told a story, and the eunuchs were there to make sure it was written, signed, and sealed into the empire's history. Not every Qing emperor insisted on it, but under certain rulers, one wrong glance could ruin your night, and maybe your future. The rule? During intimacy, the concubine was forbidden from making direct eye contact with the emperor. The official reasoning was pure hierarchy. The emperor wasn't just a man, he was the son of heaven, chosen by divine mandate to rule all under the sky. Looking him in the eye in the middle of such a private act, that was seen as crossing a line, as if you'd forgotten who was literally at the top of the pyramid. Lower your eyes, and you reminded everyone, especially yourself, that the emperor was a figure above ordinary human connection, even when lying right next to you. This wasn't just about manners, it was about psychology. Without eye contact, intimacy became less about two people and more about a ritual performance. The concubine's role was ceremonial, to serve, not to meet him as an equal. It stripped away emotional connection and replaced it with choreography. The eyes down, the voice soft, the body still and less moved. In practice, this meant the approach alone was a delicate operation. As she entered, the concubine's gaze might stay on the floor tiles, or, if she was feeling daring, on the hem of the emperor's robe. Even during the act itself, her eyes were expected to stay lowered, unless he explicitly granted permission to look. For the emperor, this could heighten the sense of control. He decided when, if ever, her eyes could meet his. For the concubine, it was a test of self-discipline. One slip, one accidental glance, and you risked offending the Son of Heaven. That could mean days, weeks, or even months of being left off the nightly roster. This wasn't a uniquely Chinese quirk either. Across the world, royal courts often had similar customs when rulers were treated as semi-divine. But in the razor-edged world of the Qing Harem, where every rule could shift a woman's fortune overnight, the no eye contact rule was especially loaded. To us, it might sound petty, but to them, it was deliberate stagecraft, one more piece of the grand performance that kept the emperor untouchable, even in his most human moments. In the Qing Harem, a single glance could change everything, which is why, under certain emperors, it was safer never to risk it at all. Picture this. You're finally in the emperor's private quarters. The silk lanterns are glowing, the air smells faintly of sandalwood, and you're not allowed to say a single word. Not hello, not how was your day, your majesty. Nothing. Some Qing emperors had a rule that intimacy had to happen in complete silence. No small talk, no sighs of affection, and in some cases, not even a polite cough. The official reasoning? This wasn't a date, this was state business. Too much passion, too much noise, was thought to distract from the real goal, producing heirs and preserving the emperor's vitality. When enforced, the silence could last from the moment you stepped into the room until the moment you were carried out again. Orders were given with the tiniest gestures, a tilt of the head, a wave of the hand, and the only sounds in the room were the whisper of silk and the occasional creak of the bed frame. Romantic? Not exactly. For some women, this was deeply unsettling. Without conversation, you couldn't tell if the emperor was pleased, bored, or thinking about tomorrow's council meeting. The whole thing could feel less like an encounter between two people and more like fulfilling a shift on the world's quietest assembly line. But silence had its uses. In a palace where gossip could topple a woman's standing overnight, no words meant no quotes for rival factions to twist. The less that was said, the fewer opportunities for intrigue, misunderstanding, or someone remembering a conversation that never actually happened. Of course, not every emperor stuck to this rule. Some liked a bit of conversation, others enjoyed playful teasing. But when the silence was enforced, it was a crystal-clear message. The emperor set the pace, the tone, and the volume. In the end, the no-speaking rule was just another extension of imperial control. The emperor already decided the when, the where, and the how. Now he was deciding the soundtrack. And for the women, it was a reminder that in the Forbidden City, even the air between words belonged to the throne. So, after walking these lantern-lit corridors, peeking into silk-draped chambers, and watching eunuchs carry imperial concubines like extremely fragile and very expensive parcels, you might be thinking, wow, the Qing harem was intense. And you'd be right. These weren't just old-fashioned quirks or a bunch of ceremonial fuss. They were the blueprint for one of the most strictly managed, politically charged intimacy systems the world has ever seen. From the second a woman's name slid onto the nightly roster to the exact minute she was carried back to her quarters, every step was wrapped in protocol. The imperial yellow sheet, the piggyback ride through silent stone corridors, the fixed bedtime window, the no lingering after midnight policy, none of it was random. Every move was calculated to protect the emperor, keep the hierarchy in check, and make sure each encounter served the dynasty's ultimate mission, producing heirs who were unquestionably legitimate. Even the so-called little details, like seasonal fertility schedules, obsessive record-keeping, or the world's most awkward post-date bedding inspection, weren't really little at all. They were part of a system that treated the emperor's private life like a military operation. In fact, some battles probably had less paperwork. And then there were the psychological touches. No eye contact unless permitted, and absolute silence unless you wanted to risk career suicide. The emperor wasn't a romantic partner. He was the son of heaven, a living embodiment of divine authority. Every interaction with him was a ceremony, not a cuddle. For the women, this world could be both a golden opportunity and a velvet prison. One night could lift your entire family into power and privilege, but months without being chosen could mean fading into obscurity, trapped behind those same red walls for the rest of your days. Strip away the silk and gold, and the harem wasn't a place of endless pleasure. It was a battlefield, fought with glances, patience, and perfect obedience, under a system that turned the most personal human act into another cog in the machinery of empire. And yet, for nearly 300 years, it worked. The Qing dynasty endured, the emperor remained both protected and exalted, and the Forbidden City stood as the ultimate symbol of imperial control. Today, those red walls are quiet. No rosters, no yellow sheets, no eunuchs shuffling down the corridors with their very precious cargo. But if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear it. The faint tap of silk shoes, the low hum of ritual, and the unshakable truth that in the Qing harem, love was never just love, it was policy.